Chippewa Falls once hummed with the activity of sawmills, which transformed the logs of the northern pinery into lumber for Chicago, St. Louis, and the Great Plains. This center for logging and lumbering grew because people found work here. By 1860, there were 674 people at the Falls of the Chippewa. A decade later, the community boasted a population of 2,507. The lumber industry was beginning its golden age in northern Wisconsin. The city had doubled in size 5 years later. And one observer noted from the hill above Duncan Creek, "Below me lay the city, gleaming in the sunlight. The sawmills snorted and puffed, telling of the work within, and busy life was everywhere apparent. Prominent among the buildings viewed from this point are the new courthouse, the 2 new hotels, the Union Lumber Company's store, and the First National Bank building." By 1910, the lumber business was on the wane, and the city's growth had slowed to a standstill. It was a city in transition to the 20th century. Today, Chippewa Falls boasts computer technology, diversified industry, and a stable population base. Come with us for an excursion through the past. Unlike trips you may have taken before, this one will be through the eyes of a traveler who sees the past embodied in the built remains left behind by people who no longer act upon this stage. The first European settlers built log cabins, such as the one preserved in Irvin Park. They used readily available materials and settled first where nature offered water power for grist mills and sawmills alike. 19th century workers lived in very plain houses. Often they resided in 2-room houses onto which were added many back and side additions, or they lived in upright and wing houses. In Chippewa Falls, many of these structures are found on the East Hill. The wealthier families, of course, lived in large, elaborate houses with very distinctive features. Of the many styles popular in the last half of the 19th century, the Italianate and Queen Anne styles predominate in Chippewa Falls because they coincided with the city's lumber boom. The entrepreneurs who made fortunes in the lumber business built houses which reflected their wealth and power. The Italianate Rutledge Mansion, surrounded by its iron fence, has retained its 19th century character. Simpler versions of the Italianate style were also built, but all Italianate houses are squarish in form, with low-hipped roofs and decorative brackets under the eaves. The Queen Anne style incorporated many different shapes and sizes of windows, complicated roof lines, porches, and multiple stories. They can be described as eclectic. Sometimes a Greek Revival facade was added to a Queen Anne house for extra class. Whether built of brick or the more common wood, late 19th century houses had massive stone foundations. Chippewa Falls is fortunate enough to have several houses built completely of cut stone. A distinctive 19th century architectural style copied from France is the Second Empire style, which is characterized by the mansard roof. Because a house often reflects a person's status in the community, owners frequently modernized the exterior of their homes to keep them fashionable. This Second Empire house was covered with brick originally, but was stuccoed in the 1910s or 1920s, when stucco was popular. During the first half of the 20th century, various earlier or revival styles of architecture became popular. The wealthy often selected Tudor revival houses, characterized by exposed wooden supports filled in with bricks. Arts and craft houses, on the other hand, were more common among the middle class. And the bungalow of the 1920s and 1930s, with its horizontal appearance, created by a low-pitched roof, one-story construction and narrow rectangular floor plan, was as common as the upright and wing house of the 19th century. The use of reddish-brown brick in chimneys, walls, and even foundations is characteristic of construction from the 1910s to the 1930s. After 1875, the railroads tied Chippewa Falls to the rest of the state and nation. Perhaps it is fitting that the railroads which linked Chippewa Falls with the outside world for so long should leave an architectural style all their own. The 6-stall wooden roundhouse in Irvine is a reminder of the steam locomotive era. In the 1930s, obsolete railroad cars were even used for diners and for homes, as is this one in Chippewa Falls. Local manufacturing and contact with the outside world made mass-produced construction materials available to Chippewa Falls residents. At times, these materials were designed to imitate more expensive materials. Cement blocks, for example, first resembled the cut stone foundation materials of the 19th century. They were long, with a rough surface. By the 1910s, they became shorter, and the surfaces were decorated with many different designs, from pebbles to irregular lines. Before the automobile came into common use in the 1920s, the streetcar line helped transport people across the city. The tracks are all gone now, but a careful examination of a few streets shows where the tracks used to be. Streetcars took people to work, to shop, and to play. Urban Park was a major recreational attraction for the people of Chippewa Falls and Eau Claire. Here, too, one finds distinctive architecture. The Urban Park Station was the Chippewa Falls terminus for the interurban streetcar line. With the increased use of the private automobile, residents of Chippewa Falls required better roads and stronger bridges. Of the city's many interesting bridges, the Marsh Rainbow Bridge on Spring Street is unique in the state. It is the only remaining concrete arched bridge. As suburban construction expanded after World War II, houses became simpler. The Cape Cod was a typical starter home for the returning GIs who received federal loans and tax advantages. The houses of the 1980s are becoming more complicated in design again, but frequently use convenience materials such as stain instead of paint. The importance of cars in our lives is prominently displayed by double or even triple garages. The way we live, work, and play is reflected in the structures we build. Just as homes reflect individuals, civic buildings reflect the importance with which local residents viewed their local institutions. Institutional buildings in the late 19th century frequently were built with brick by prominent local architects and contractors. For example, St. Charles Catholic Church and the old St. Joseph's Hospital were designed by Sam Snyder, a leading architect of this region. Parochial and public schools reflected the pride and value of education in the community. The result was impressive buildings, like the 1907 McDonald School. The Northern Wisconsin Center for the Developmentally Disabled has 19th century buildings ranging from the plain brick administrative building to the decorative eating hall. The Rutledge Home for the Aged is an architectural landmark of revival styles popular from the 1910s to the 1930s. By the time the Rutledge home was constructed, active lumbering was over. Nonetheless, the city's economy was dominated by manufacturing concerns, such as the woolen mill. And of course, the community had its own brewery. Almost every Wisconsin town in the 19th century boasted at least one such establishment. The Leinekugel Brewery has outlived most of the others. Its existing buildings typify the brick and stone industrial construction common during the last century. The commercial district of the downtown also tells the story of Chippewa Falls' architectural history. Stores on Bridge Street reflect the tall character of 19th century buildings and display the elaborate brickwork typical of the late Victorian era. Store owners seem to be continually changing the facades of their businesses. Sometimes a cut stone facade or a new metal face was added to a brick building. The distinctive dark reddish brick of the 1910s to the 1930s shows up on commercial buildings too, as in the northern apartments with its glazed tiles or terracotta accent on both ends of the building. Although finished in 1951, the Chippewa County Courthouse shows influences of the architecture characteristic of the Depression era. Over the entrances, stylized stone reliefs portray the early history of Chippewa County. Our brief excursion through Chippewa Falls architectural heritage provides a distinctly different view of Chippewa from the one found in the history books. The picture one gets from local histories is of a city trapped in the logging era. Of course, this is an incomplete picture. Our travels through time have been based upon a study of the architectural history of Chippewa Falls. The researchers relied on books, microfilmed newspapers, and original records available at the Chippewa Falls Public Library, the UW Eau Claire Area Research Center, the State Historical Society of Wisconsin, and the Minnesota Historical Society. To supply the information necessary to understand Chippewa's most significant structures, the researchers studied the architects, carpenters, construction firms, brickyards, lumber companies, and stone quarries, which played a role in local construction activities. They also researched specific properties, using records available in the abstract office and the offices of the Register of Deeds, the county treasurer, the city clerk, and the city engineer. Based on this research, specific structures and several districts in Chippewa Falls will be nominated for inclusion in the National Register of Historic Places. The information will also be valuable as Chippewa Falls plans for future industrial development while preserving the city's heritage and architectural diversity. But what can you do to help preserve the beauty and diversity of our community? Think of the way all good things get done in our lives, by personal involvement. Future urban planning should take Chippewa's architectural heritage into consideration as an asset to tourism, to economic development, and to the quality of our lives. You can have an impact by showing an interest in such mundane matters as zoning laws, by encouraging local officials to create a Historic Landmarks Commission, by joining or forming community organizations which publicize the importance of preserving significant structures, not as rickety relics of some dusty past, but as symbols of the vibrant enthusiasm with which our forebears viewed the future. The preservation of our architectural legacy can start with groups of people or with conversations with public officials, but it can also start in our own block or in our own yard. A house may be 10 years old or 110 years old, but both structures require attention and care. The fact that one lives in a neighborhood of ranch-style houses from the 1960s, or bungalows from the 1920s, or Queen Anne homes from the 1880s, does not alter the importance of one's neighborhood or make one area more worthy of upkeep than another. A ranch-style home may not seem significant now, for it is not old, but time is a marvelous equalizer. All things age. Individual attention to preventative maintenance is one of the best ways a person can contribute to the preservation of our heritage. Similarly, the developer who purchases an old house in the hope of using the land for construction of an office building need not tear down the existing structure. Through the adaptive reuse or remodeling of an existing structure, an old mansion can be converted into gracious apartments or elegant offices. Often such conversions can be done for less than new construction while preserving the beauty of an old facade which had long been a community landmark. There are places one can turn for assistance. Numerous publications provide valuable insights into preservation and renovation of historical structures. In addition, the Historic Preservation Division of the State Historical Society can provide information which may be useful in your preservation work. The early settlers of Chippewa are gone now, but they left something enduring. They left behind the buildings, the bridges, the streets, and the neighborhoods which we take for granted. Look around. What do we see? We see old structures mingled with new. The richness of our community reflects our present world and the past as well. What we see is a world created by people and changed by people as they lived their lives. When we save an older building from the wrecking ball, or revitalize an old neighborhood, we are preserving not only part of what we were, but part of what we are as well. This is what historic preservation is all about, and our lives are enriched by the diversity presented when old and new are mixed.
Mm-hmm.